in order to be fair to my father, David Landwehr, I must revise certain things I've said at the end of High Hurdler.
What you did the other day wasn't High Hurdle, it was Lake Fontana.
Fontana Lake, at the end of Fontana Lake. I had claimed that he, under the influence of alcohol, had an automobile accident in his 190 SL sports car and had pulled into traffic after having eaten dinner in an Italian restaurant in West Knoxville, and with my son and his grandson, Davy Van Baxter, and his best friend, Georg Bauman, son of I wish to add that I myself made a very foolish decision when requested by the woman who worked for my mother as her cook and cleaning lady, Esther Hartfield, asked me if she could drive, if I'd teach her how to drive my mother's car, which is a Buick 4-door new car. I allowed her to take the wheel, and she, with my son inside and me, put her foot on the accelerator and couldn't take it off, and ran up on in the back of a building where there was a big clothesline on a clotheslines and place for drying clothes on a metal pole dug into the ground, probably in concrete. She ran up on this thing and turned the car over on top of us, with all the glass in the car and the windshield and all the windows broken. I had to get Davy out of that car. Both of us could have been killed, and Esther. Fortunately, nobody was injured. Just that the car was totaled. And I picked the glass from the broken windows and windshield, fragments out of Davy's hair, and nobody didn't get in anybody's eyes, or nobody was cut. There was no injuries of any kind. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. And my father stupidly was driving, under the influence, having had beer for dinner, maybe slightly inebriated, and pulling into traffic, so he got hit in the front left fender of his car, a few feet from where David was sitting in the passenger seat. Neither Georg Bauman nor Davy were hurt, thank God. I wasn't in the car. The impact, the car that hit my father's car, collapsed the front right wheel, and it was quite an impact. I also, we've just had Thanksgiving, and I want to acknowledge And my father was extremely supportive and understanding of me in my adolescence. And any questions I had about sexuality, he was very, would carefully, patiently answer the questions. And he also invited me, if I ever had something that I was needed to say that had nobody else to talk to, he would be happy to bring whatever it was to him. Now, I never took him up on that offer because I never need to. I should have told him about my problems with my fiance, Davey's mother, Anita, when I was very, very threatened by her first boyfriends with whom she had been intimate, and I was very really pathologically jealous of these people and fixed on them, and also made her miserable about that. And basically, I destroyed her love for me in our first year of marriage with these expressions of pathological jealousy. I should have discussed that with him. I was really sick, psychologically sick, and I needed help. I should have been psychoanalyzed or something. It was just absolutely outrageous. I mean, I should have married a virgin if that was my problem. And maybe by talking to my father about it, he might have suggested something that would have kept me from going ahead with my marriage. My proposal was first rejected by Davy's mother, and I threatened suicide to get her to say yes. It was, we were both in schools right after exams, February 4th, and David was born the next year, about a year later. And if I hadn't married her, maybe we wouldn't have Davy. So I'd also like to say that my father, in coaching Jessica and her best friend Sarah Campion, and also another friend, Kira Porter, and playing the flute, molested them. He fondled one of the girls. And I don't know what the extent of what he did to Jessica, but she was my stepdaughter. I was responsible for her safety and well-being. He did this in my own house. And it still outrages me. I do want to say, in appreciation and thanks to him, to his memory, that when I was young, I was undersized. I never grew to his height, 5'11" and a half, almost 6 feet, because my grandfather had felt he was too tall and married a woman who was 4'10", Matilda Benstemacher, May Van Vector. And so I got her genes, only grew to 5'6", and I could have used being a taller man, 6 foot or over. I did not get the tall genes, and Davy's a little taller than I am. He's about 5'10", I think. But when I was developing, going through puberty, and I was sexually developing, Daddy was very encouraging. I wanted to get strong, and he helped me. He helped me get a with it was for exercising, pulling against tension, against springs. He helped me attach this device to the wall. I developed very strong shoulders, which were very important when I was started to be a wrestler at Lawrenceville, and also some other exercises, some weights. I think we got. So I became very strong. I mean, I was growing. I never, I didn't have a big, huge growth spurt like shooting up 8 or 10 inches or something like that. But I mean, I got my growth, and then he always talked about his sports that he played: basketball and track, high jumping, pole vaulting, throwing the javelin, and the high hurdles. And the hurdles, I mean, to the 100-yard dash and 10 flat. I talked about this earlier. And one thing that he did that I'm quite ashamed of is that he was worried about the young man who was managing the orchestra. He and his secretary had managed the Nashville Symphony Orchestra. He hired a young man who did very well on the job, very, very reliable, loved his job, and he hugely admired my father. And this man was a homosexual or gay, we might say now. He was worried that some of the board members might get wind of this and that it would threaten his job. So he brought the young man in, told him that he'd have to let him go. And his reason for doing it, he said, because you're a homosexual. I'm very ashamed of this. And it hurt this young man. It was horrible, horrible, devastating blow. He'd done the best he could, worked very hard, and actually was quite confident in the way he managed the orchestra. He was never irresponsible in any way. There was nothing he did that deserved being fired. And to be told because of his sexual orientation was just, tragically hurtful and wronging this person. He really wronged this man. I'm very ashamed of my father for that. And I hate to admit it. I don't want to turn the world against my father. My father needs to be recognized. His works need to be known because I think they're very beautiful. And I'm very proud of what he accomplished with the 100 works he wrote. He wrote works of music he wrote. He also, in the children's concerts that he gave, every year in May, there would be a tune contest. And he would call for submissions to this contest. And he'd stay up all night long, orchestrating and writing out parts for every instrument in the orchestra for the tune he chose. I mean, he'd be up literally till 5 in the morning completing this work. It's a huge amount of work. And it was a thrill to these children, some of them black, coming from county schools, some of them country kids who won. And in several cases, it was such a huge event for them that a few of them became composers after that, musicians. To have a good orchestra play, beautifully orchestrated, to these tunes, it was a thrill. Because this is a part of the children's concerts. He gave children's concerts for the county and city schools every year. And once a year, he'd meet the superintendent, Mildred Patterson, and the other superintendent of the county school, and plan the concerts, and how the buses would bring all the school children from all these schools, segregated schools and integrated schools, obviously, to the University of Tennessee gym, where the concerts were given, and the prizes for the best tune were handed out and played for each winner as they came to the stage. It would be played by the full orchestra. It was a very, very wonderful, wonderful contribution. He created a musical culture there in Knoxville, Tennessee, which it really had not had a musical culture. And because of that, you got several very good composers, Richard Trisol and his brother Gilbert Trisol, and another named Davis. He created something that had not existed through tremendous hard work and his love of musical education. He was a great musical educator. I'm very proud of him for that. He never abused any woman in terms of rape or any kind of thing, but I mean, the fondling of my stepdaughter, Jessica, and her friend, Sarah Campion. I mean, if their parents had known, and Kira Porter was shameful and wrong. It did not, I don't know that it did any lasting damage. It wasn't molested in any kind of really terribly overt fashion. He didn't hurt them physically, but it was wrong. And it was in my house. I mean, if Jessica's father had ever known about this, I would have been horrible for me. I mean, I am very sorry that that ever happened. There was no way, I didn't see it going on. I would have stopped it immediately, of course, if I'd seen it. And maybe I should have been more watchful of how he taught these young girls who were learning flute. I mean, he's a terrific flute teacher. Jessica was, and her friends were lucky to have his coaching and tutelage. He'd been a great flute teacher. He started one of his students who had some kind of physical disability with her mouth, and it was very, very difficult for her to learn how to blow the flute and make a good job. But he eventually succeeded in that. And the principal flutist of the Boston Symphony, Dorio Anthony Dwyer, who was the descendant of Susan B. Anthony, who led the suffragette movement in Chicago, was sent to him at 10 years old to study the flute. But he thought that his colleague, Ernst Legel, who played first flute, not second flute as my father did with the Chicago Symphony, was maybe a better teacher. So he gave her to him to be her teacher. She became a very famous flutist in America, the first chair principal flutist of any orchestra, the first woman. And also one of his best friends, Peggy Harden, he wrote etudes for, and she later recorded those. She had actually some deformity with her hands, but she was able to record all those etudes, and they're published by Roger Rhodes Limited in New York. All his works are published by Roger Rhodes Limited. And there's a website. All these works are available. For any works of his that need to be played by large ensembles. These parts are available through the Philadelphia Free Library and through Roger Rhodes, any orchestra who wanted to, let's say, play any of his symphonies. He wrote 7. One of them has never been premiered, the 7th. The 5th symphony was played, a movie was made of the first performance with Arpad Yo conducting the Knoxville Symphony, and it was made into a video, and that was played on NPR all over the country, WGBH at Boston and many other stations. It's a beautiful, beautiful film made by Blaise Sprout. Also, he was by the Tennessee State Senate, he was made composer laureate of the state of Tennessee for life. Now, this in a state where you get some famous original composers of popular or folk music like Johnny Cash or the Carter Sisters. I mean, you're talking about competing with very famous commercial musicians. Now, a lot of these people, he taught harmony to it at the University of Tennessee, first year theory. He sent these people to Nashville, to the Grand Ole Opry, really knowing how to write good harmony, write canons and write to play in thirds, harmonized in thirds from each other, and he made a big contribution. But to be composer laureate with the kind of talent that was in Tennessee at that time, especially when they come in from the hills. I mean, I went to school with the Everly Brothers in junior high school. I mean, there were some very, very successful musicians that came out of the hills around Knoxville, came in, and there were radio stations there, so their records were produced. The Everly Brothers were putting out records. Their father was managing that. And they're wonderful, wonderful singers. Don Everly was a friend of mine. And one of the songs that I remember particularly is called Dreams. Wonderful song. I forget the tune. But for him to be the number one man in music in that state, where there was a lot of music made all over by people who are from Scotch-Irish ancestry, and there was a tradition in those families of making music and playing the string instruments like the banjo and guitar and harmonica and some of the fiddles. He did a lot of recording to the University of Tennessee of somebody named Maria Barnacle, all that music. He got all that music recorded, and some of it written down that came in from the hills, and it was a big project. It was a ethnography project of importance. I'm very proud of my father, and may his soul rest in peace. I hope, I'm sure he's aware of the things that I feel that he did wrong, his infidelities, etc. But High Hurdler, David Glenn Van Vactor, was a very original, hardworking man who had extraordinary optimism and always would find a way to do. He said, I came down here to do great things. And he thought of it as pioneer work. Creating a musical culture in a place where there had been none, and also starting a very good art department. And they sort of got me started painting. My mother went down, talked to one of the art professors, and said, what did she need to buy to get me set up so I could start painting oils. I was starting painting oils at Lawrenceville with this paint box full of Grimbacher tubes of oil paints. Got everything I needed: linseed oil, the palette knives, um, turpentine, whatever I needed. And my father took me and got me good drawing pens in Paris for uh, India ink, and made sure I got very good quality paper. And I'd go to we take our trips around Europe, and I'd always have either my French horn or my paint box, canvases, and maybe a little easel I could put, one of those ones made out of, with the poles out of aluminum, and not a big wooden easel, but everything I needed. We'd take that around. I'd be unpacking all that stuff. I'd be practicing my horn, and people banging on my doors in hotel rooms in Paris and so on. But I got started early. I would go to the Académie de la Grande Chaumière in Paris, and with my drawing, my pens and charcoal pencils and whatever, and there'd be live models there every day. And I'd draw for maybe 8 hours. That was my art school. I do still lifes, draperies, studies of hands, faces, and out of that, also my sister modeled for me. I did a tremendous amount of work. President of the art club at Lawrenceville. When I went to Harvard, I roomed with John Douglas, who had gone to Andover and who had learned non-objective oil painting. He painted with Cassine on huge canvases in our dormitory room, in Mauer House, in Harvard Yard. And I came there, and I was absolutely, he was so far beyond me in the abstract art he was producing. I was very early, I was very influenced by Picasso, but I wasn't doing really, truly, completely non-objective abstract art. I was still trying to do figurative art and landscapes and portraits, etc. Interiors. But so my father's role in my life, also, he was very encouraging in my playing the French horn, which is a hard instrument to play. It's probably as hard as the oboe. I'd taken violin when I was 8, and I didn't keep it up more than about a year. It didn't really stick. I should have learned the piano. But he never gave me a hard time when I didn't continue with the horn. I did go back to it from one of his friends, who was Osborne McConaughey, who was fifth horn in the Boston Orchestra. I got some instruction. And then when I was in Frankfurt learning German, I got the first horn and the Hessian Rundfunk Orchestra. That's the radio orchestra of Frankfurt, with which my father recorded a lot of American composers and all of his best works through an engineer called Hans Enke, who was a terrific person. And they were very good recordings. He had, because of my going to Everest Records and getting Gideon Cornfield to take on the distribution of 10 long playing records came all his major pieces, his symphony, all the band pieces, the 36 pieces for woodwinds, and a lot of other pieces, and the 4 etudes. And later we have CDs. We have the 4 etudes, the first symphony. We have the his first quartet should be on YouTube by now. I've given it to Roger Rhodes. I don't know if it's available, but his example in my life has everything to do with the fact that I am still operating after going through cancer, surviving cancer, tongue cancer, and about 9 strokes. They call them here, translated literally from the French, accidents, cardiovascular accidents. Well, for me, the word is stroke, not AVC as they say here. But without my father, my artistic life, both as in my drawing and my painting, would not have really flourished or continued with a lot of productivity, even to this day. I don't have the use of my left hand. My right hand works pretty well. I keep it strong. I have some arthritis, but I use a squeeze device to keep it strong, and it sort of gets me over the pain in my fingers. So the hand works pretty well. And but his encouragement, every time I would come home from Lawrenceville with a painting, my parents would put it over the fireplace on the wall, so I'd always see it. And many other paintings I gave them, my mother would have them beautifully framed, and they were always hanging in the house. And when they moved to California and lived in Century City, and my mother moved back to Boston and was living in near the Prudential Towers and high-rise building. I had several paintings up in her apartment when all the furniture came back from California, so she moved back east. And they loved my paintings. They were great encouragement, both of them. And it helped. That's one reason I was so productive, because I could see the pleasure I was giving other people through them, and they were always huge supporters of me. And my father's music has always moved me, and made a huge contribution to my life. And I learned tremendous amount from him about musical structure. As I said in another part of this biography of my father, the first part being High Hurdler, and then Fontana Lake, how he had played on the piano and talked about every new piece he ever wrote with me. Speaking of the structure and the whole concept of the work. What a huge contribution to my life. And then, I might have to wait 3 or 4 months or a year or a couple of years to actually hear the actual performance done someplace, and maybe even longer for it to actually be recorded on a long playing record or a CD. I got 3 CDs out of his pieces. I'm very happy with those. They turned out quite well. And then there are many other stories to tell. Some of them about, he always gave me some kind of firearm. I had an antique gun collection that I started when I was about 12 years old. A lot of it, there was a place in New York called Abel's that I had a catalog to, and I got a lot of my collection from Abel's. And then in Paris, I found a place, for instance, we were in Chinon, where the Rabelais had lived, the great poet, satiric poet, and I noticed there was a kind of antique fair, and I spotted from a great distance these two beautiful dueling pistols. On the butt of the handle of one of them was a silver carved Medusa. Um, these were dueling pistols. It was probably about 50 caliber pistol with beautiful checkered handles. And but my father would give me a gun every Christmas. I had a beautiful pair of Browning over and unders, one a duck gun and the other a skeet gun, 26 inches. The duck gun was 28 inches long. And because he'd been too poor to own a good shotgun. He only had a single shot rifle as a young boy in Indiana. And of course, I said he'd hunted to put meat on the table and fished also, the Tippecanoe. Bring fish home or clean them, and or other kinds of game, birds, rabbits, squirrels. And a lot of people wouldn't eat a squirrel, but I'll tell you, if you cook them the right way, they're delicious. And we also went on our duck hunting trips to Arkansas. We found a place where you could get barbecued raccoon, which is really fabulous. So that's all I forgot to say about my dad. He was very loving to me, very affectionate. We always hugged and kissed, and he's a strong man. Had a very strong back, strong legs because he'd been a runner, and really his example. I used to run about 5 miles a day when I was training for wrestling for my wind. And, his example was there. And always the idea that you could be a good athlete and you could also be an artist or do something intellectual. And one of my football coach at Lawrenceville actually won a All-American as a kicker for Princeton. And Ken Kirkle, and he had gotten a PhD at Princeton, written on fielding, written on the picaresque novel. And he was a great example to me. Just somebody who'd been famous in the national scene, college football player, and who was also a literary scholar. Was a great example for me to see that you could be an intellectual, you could be an artist, but you could still be a good athlete. Plato was always held up as a great Olympic athlete, and of course, in Athens, the Olympic Games, where the Olympic Games and the great marathons were run. The classics were part of my education, Latin and Greek. Unfortunately, I never learned Greek, but I had good French and 5 years of Latin at Lawrenceville. Very lucky for that. Read all the classics, read the Aeneid, every line, memorized a lot of it. And at Harvard, Chaucer, Spencer, the 17th century Renaissance poets like Donne, Herbert, Vaughan, Traherne, Ben Jonson. I was very lucky in my education. I had all the great works. I read all the great works, Wordsworth, Keats, Coleridge. To be able to write good prose poems, having the models of what a great poem was. I'd also had not done, of course, in Milton, but when I got my master's degree at the University of Connecticut, I made sure to fill in that gap by taking a full course in Milton, which has always meant a lot to me. So that's it. I'm hoping that this recitation will be typed up and so it can be published in book form at some point. So I will conclude now, and thank you for your patience. And I think I've been fairly modern in my judgment of my father. I made it clear what I felt was wrong that he did, and maybe why. I think I've had a pretty good understanding of him. Why he abused his body with smoking and alcoholism, and especially with a family that had 7 children out of 15 die of consumption, and to be abusing his lungs with tobacco smoke, which he depended on for his livelihood as a flutist. But fortunately, he was waving his arms around, conducting a lot, so he's getting a lot of exercise and breathing as a conductor, and was able to almost get to 88 years old. Well, I had great love for my father. I really loved him intensely and admired him, and always emulated his extraordinary hard work, the constant work of preparing for his concerts, learning scores, all the work he did for his various students of composition, flute, conducting. He's a great teacher, great harmony teacher. I remember one time he told me, joyfully coming back from class, how he'd just taken a very, very short phrase like da 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 dee da 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 dee, something that's just like about 10 notes, 8 or 10 notes long, and he'd gone through with the students each of the intervals, a second, a third, a fourth, a seventh, an eighth, a ninth, and then he talked about all the implications harmonically, and he got them to just sort of improvise in their minds about the implications of this kind of germ idea for a good tune to harmonize and maybe make into a piece of music, into a scherzo, a rondo form, a canon, possibly even a fugue, because he did his master's degree at Northwestern in the art of the fugue by Bach, and that should be available through the Northwestern Music School Library. And in fact, my son David is going to Chicago. He's going to try to find it. My father wrote 4 fugues in his 4 etudes for winds and percussion. He wrote about 4 fugues in his concerto quattro for 3 flutes and harp, and they're beautiful. He's a great master of canonic writing, counterpoint. The book he always read was Daniel Fuchs's Gradus ad Parnassum, steps toward paradise, or Montparnasse, as they say in Paris. So that's it. Thank you for your patience. I hope it's been entertaining and informative. And on YouTube, you should be able to get some of his music. That's it. Just press the bar. Okay.